Hi, everyone, and welcome to Jellyfish DAO. So if you don't know us yet, we are a group of filmmakers and longevity advocates who believe that media and stories have the power to move people and to change minds and hearts. And our mission is to do just that with longevity. So this is our first of a series of conversations that we'll have with bold longevity leaders, such as our special guest today. But first, we just like to express how delighted we are to collaborate with VitaDAO on this and hopefully also share this content with the VitaDAO community. So our guest today, as you guys know, is neuroscientist Jean Hebert. And I'll just open with a few words about Jean. So Jean was born in Quebec City and grew up in Montreal, Canada. From as far back as he can remember, he has been fascinated by what we as living creatures are made of. When he learned early on that a single cell forms the whole human body following an innate genetic program, he became driven by how this process might be used to improve our biological fates and defeat aging. This interest led him to do a PhD in genetics at the University of California, San Francisco, where with Dr. Gail Martin, he studied the regulation of embryonic stem cell differentiation. Jean then moved to Stanford University for postdoctoral studies with Dr. Susan McConnell, where he focused on neural stem cells and how they generate the neocortex, which is the part of the brain that we use for our highest cognitive functions. He's now a professor in the neuroscience and genetics at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and his lab focuses on cell and tissue-based approaches to reverse brain aging. So, hi, Jean. We are very excited to have you with us. And thank you for being our first guest in this series.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm honored.
So, yeah, sorry. Go on.
And for the nice intro, thanks.
I think I'd like to open this conversation by asking you, I'm curious to know how you view the relationship between cultural trends and scientific progress. Do you think that public opinion can truly meaningfully accelerate or hinder science?
I I'm a big supporter of what you guys are doing. So thank you for your efforts. So, I totally agree that, we can change the hearts and minds of people by storytelling with documentaries about how people's lives are affected by aging and then, what we can do about it. So no, absolutely. I think there's an important role to be played there by people like you. I'm not so in tune with how you go about doing this, but I know you guys have experience. But just looking at throughout history of science and technology, right? The storytelling always precedes and excites people about what's coming up in the future. So, people still refer to, talking about AI, about these science fiction writers who sort of set the stage for this. And it creates a lot of excitement, inspires people to make these ideas that are in the minds of storytellers to come to life and materialize in reality.
Can you explain as a scientist how you experience this affecting your work? Does it directly affect your ability to do more research or more? Can you see the connection there?
Personally, when I was growing up, there are some sort of events in the art or storytelling world that influenced me. When I was a young kid, I saw the movie Westworld. So this predates the current series. And, it starred Yul Brynner, which most people probably have not heard of at this point. And I was just, blown away by the fact that the idea of a person and what a person is not set in stone. It could be synthetic, it could be biologic, and that, that had a pretty big impact on me, I guess, because I started thinking about how we can change who we are to better ourselves in the future.
Because you mentioned Westworld, which has a general theme, would you think of the ideal longevity movie or TV series which has one critical thing in order to understand longevity, which would be that one thing, if there would be an ideal longevity movie or TV series?
Yeah. I guess it'd be.
Does it have to do with replacing brain tissue or replacing?
Yeah, so there's another series that I was encouraged to watch because my thoughts are pretty aligned with it. I forget what it's called. Altered Carbon. Yeah. And there they just replace bodies, which I think is a way of defeating aging. But I didn't like for the brain. They just have this. They just copy from one. I forget what it was. One thing to another. So yeah, I think the brain is sort of a challenge for a lot of science writers and also just biologists in general, people who are interested in longevity and want to radically extend lifespan. But there's not that much attention given to the brain because it is complicated, but it's also who we are as individuals. And if we don't deal with brain aging, we're going to fail. So we have to find a way to reverse brain aging. And so, yeah, that's what I work on. And that's, what I would love to see, a story told about. But again, that.
And when do you think we will successfully be able to rejuvenate our brain, to replace the brain tissue successfully and be able to do that successfully?
Yeah, I think it's really a matter of who we can get involved in making this happen. Because, there are a few labs, like there was a paper recently, some of you may have seen in Nature that just came out, where they put in cerebral organoids in a mouse, in a rat actually, and showed that the human neurons integrated quite well with the host and could even to some extent be incorporated in a reward behavior circuit, so somewhat functional. So that's, again, fantastic. So there's a lot of examples of this that go back like 10 years, showing that we can replace cells or tissues in the brain to some extent. But to reverse brain aging, you want to eventually replace the whole brain. So that tissue has to work normally. And so far, there's not enough effort in creating tissues that will work normally. These organoids are despite their name, very disorganized. They don't match the structure of the surrounding host brain. There's missing cell types, and so they can't possibly function normally enough for us to want to use for this purpose. And getting to that point where we have the means of replacing brain tissue in a way that works for us, will work for humans without, losing our continuity of self and self-identity and everything that's dear to us. We see how we can get there, but there's going to be a lot of troubleshooting, a lot of adjusting, and we need more people working on it. So, I've made this comparison before, but it's like in the early 60s, JFK said, let's put person on the moon by the end of the decade, and the technology didn't exist yet. Yet we knew it was possible. We weren't going to break any laws of physics in doing this. And it's sort of the same. We know progressive brain tissue replacement is possible, but there's a lot of little things that we need to work out. And, we need like a team of 100 people working on the different aspects that we need over the course of the next, 5-10 years to get there in a sort of a decade's time span. If it's just my little lab, plugging away at this, it's going to take much too long. Most of us won't be there to see it happen. So it's just a matter of how much we can generate interest in this and how much we can get more people involved.
Yeah, I was curious what you think. Like when you see science portrayed in movies, like, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like they ever get it right? Or do you feel like it's just sort of glossed over? Or what's your when you see a movie about science, what do you feel about it?
Yeah, a lot of times, right, there's not much in the way of biology to start with. The biological aspects of science fiction tend to be way behind, the physics and astrophysics or even quantum physics stuff, which is people have a lot of imagination for. But in terms of the biology, it's sometimes even behind what we can do presently, and it's portrayed as science fiction. So, people are not doing their homework in terms of. So I think for the aspects of biology, at least, they're either misrepresented or just totally not ignored or not very creative in terms of moving forward. So it'd be nice to see more of that for sure.
So just related to this last question, I wonder what you think is the biggest knowledge gap that exists between the science itself and longevity and how lay people perceive the science. And I guess the media is an expression of that. But in your interactions, what do you usually notice that people misunderstand most?
Okay, so I guess here I can go into a sort of what makes scientists like me who come at longevity and aging and defeating aging in a different way than many others, is that, again, based on the evidence we have of accumulation of damage, we really think that it's the field of regenerative medicine and, tissue, organ, body replacement, brain tissue replacement that's going to beat aging. And I guess, there's a huge misunderstanding even within the longevity research field that this might be tractable with drugs or, small molecule drugs or genetic engineering or, other approaches. Not that genetic engineering can't one day beat it, but we're going to have to, create new organisms to do that, and new genes that don't exist yet. So I think there's a sort of a misrepresentation that we're just going to fix little, or try to adjust little things here and there, and that's going to make us live substantially longer, or at least long enough that we can then fix a few more little things, and that's going to make us live a little bit longer. But I haven't seen any of those things, those little things that are going to really help us extend in any significant way the human lifespan. So again, that's my perspective, and I would love to get in a room with people that disagree with me and discuss this in depth based on the science that we know about this accumulation of super complex damage that occurs with age. There are no genes that exist to repair this damage. Trying to implement these repair mechanisms that people like to imagine without side effects seems rather unrealistic as well. I don't want to get in necessarily in too deep in that, but I do want to put that out there that this is an area I think where more discussion, even among scientists, would help the public understand a little better that the complexity of the problem we're facing, and that the solutions are not necessarily going to be popping pills or something similar to that.
And just a side note, your book, Replacing Aging, is fascinating, I'm sure, to scientists, but also to lay people like myself whose understanding is limited. Recommended. It's a really unique approach, it seems, to overcoming aging. So, yes.
Thanks.
So, what do you say? What is your response to this? The common concern that addressing aging to begin with is a first world problem. It's a privilege to deal with. It's not really like our priorities should be different. There are starving children in Africa, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, you could just look at the numbers. That's one way of doing it. What kills more people than anything else? Aging, because it causes all these diseases. What do we value most? If you look at it just from an ethical point of view, what do we value most? Life, right? And everybody's going to get, hit with aging, and their brains are going to degenerate, their whole bodies are going to degenerate, and they're going to die. I mean, I think it's that simple. I mean, if we value life, I mean, this should be top priority.
Could I add something to that? By the way, I don't know if there's participation.
Go ahead, please.
Cool. So I want to add that I think this is a very nuanced question, which fundamentally asks, should we prioritize the immediate future or the more distant future? So if somebody is dying right now and suffering right now, are we just going to say, we're not going to help you at all? So at the end of the day, we're talking about allocation of resources, and the answer is not going to be an absolute, even though I agree with everything Jean said philosophically. I think that's absolutely convincing. But I think the question we need to ask ourselves is the right ratio of allocation of resources, given what Jean said, 999 to 1, skewed towards suffering in the present instead of dealing with the future and preventing the thing which is causing the most number of deaths and will cause the death and suffering of everybody who today is alive. And I think that's the key, that the resource allocation is completely absurd. Instead of being 999 to 1, it should be maybe something like 80-20. Or maybe there's an argument to be made there. Maybe it should be 85-15 or 50-50. Maybe Jean would think it should be 80-20 in the reverse way, but there's definitely an argument, a discussion that could be had there, which acknowledges that today's allocation is completely lopsided. It puts the cart before the horse, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, especially for funding bodies like the NIH, right, where it really is a pie that has to be divided for different things. And so there, a certain amount has to be allocated for things we can do to relieve disease and suffering immediately, and all these different diseases. And then also, I think we agree more should be allocated to research on fighting aging. But is it true that overall, I mean, that they have to be sort of mutually exclusive like this? I mean, can't we make the pie bigger? Just total, I mean, we're trying to do this. There are funds that are growing allocated to longevity research. So hopefully, there's not such a limit in the resources in terms of funding for these kinds of things. I don't know. I mean,
Tim and Elena, do you have any more questions before we soon move to our Q&A phase of the conversation?
Yeah, I want kind of jumping back to movies and sort of storytelling. Jean, I don't know what do you think of, like, there's often a debate about positive movies or dystopian movies. I think our approach here is to kind of favor positive movies. I'm curious if you have any take on, do you think the idea of painting a positive future and kind of, bringing people along with that is more powerful, or do you think there is any power to a dystopian story, like a cautionary tale?
Okay. I guess, I'm just thinking of like big blockbuster science fiction movies. They often are set initially in sort of a dystopian context, but what everybody loves is, you come out of that the other side, with a very positive outcome that, somehow you regain whatever it is. So I guess strategically in storytelling, it might create dystopia might create some drama that is helpful ultimately for a positive message.
Yeah, just curious. Thank you. I see those debates on Twitter sometimes, and I think, I think positive is the way to go, but in my mind, it's like you can still have drama and conflict in a positive movie too. And I think that's some of the approach that we're taking.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you need dystopia.
I would be curious to know if there is any other way, even if it's small, to somehow to age our brain later rather than earlier. For example, I read an article that if you learn new skills or if you learn new languages, you can help a little bit, even in a small amount, to prevent dementia. And I want to know if it's a myth or if it's true. What do you think, Jean?
No, there are a lot of little things I think you can do to help your cognitive performance as you get older. I think there was just another article, it might have been in Nature last few days or weeks, showing that, exercise, again, sort of outperforms all these drugs for like Alzheimer's predisposition, right? So, just taking care of yourself, exercising, these are all things that make, possibly the biggest difference so far, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other little things in terms of drugs or treatments that might also help. It's been hard to show that in people. A big factor is your genetics, what you're born with, your ApoE status. Those have very measurable differences. And so, I haven't seen much research into, adjusting your ApoE type. ApoE is secreted. So, that seems like a pretty obvious thing people could be doing. But yeah, sure, there might be some things like that will help. But they're not going to radically, extend your brain's lifespan, which is really, a couple of quite a while ago, they measure, for example, the stiffening of blood vessels. So this isn't just for the brain, but for the whole body. Blood vessels, a big component of their walls is a protein called elastin, and it accumulates all these different forms of stochastic damage, and it doesn't get replaced. From when we develop as a fetus and a child, the elastin that goes into our blood vessels is there for life. And it just breaks down and gets rigid. And our blood vessels alone and elastin alone sort of is going to set a limit to the human lifespan. if, we don't address that and all the other forms of damage, we're not going to significantly extend brain lifespan or lifespan in general of the body. Yeah. So, yeah.
I wanted to mention the fasting, which we all know that it has health benefits for sure. I wanted to know if, for example, you do intermediate fasting or fasting like twice a week. What would you recommend, and what's the do you think it helps?
Yeah, I would recommend trying to exercise a little bit every day. Eating less is probably a good thing as well. I don't eat lunch, which allows me to get a lot more done in the day. It has many benefits, productivity as well as health benefits. Those definitely are good things to do.
Great.
Okay. So, let's go to our Q&A, as we have quite a lot of questions. So I see Adam here. Would you like to ask the questions yourself, Adam? Are you here?
Oh, I mean, I think it's just a comment because there was discussion in the thread, but I think that in general, in the context of dystopia or utopia, I think the current situation is the dystopia. So in other words, what I think may be a really good course will be to essentially rip the facade of politeness from the ugliness, which is this strategy of normalizing death. So in other words, what you want is something where the villain is clearly the villain and the hero is clearly the hero. So for example, a scenario where you have somebody, the parents want to live. There's a rejuvenating therapy that Jean develops, and the parents are desperate for that therapy, but their son or daughter, who happens to run some federal body, is like, no, people are meant to die, and denies their parents the life-saving medicine out of that cruelty. That's what I would describe as the current actual reality in terms of our resource allocation. It is really dystopian, and it's disturbing. We don't have to go far to get to dystopia.
Nice.
Hey, thank you. I see, Victor, you had an interesting question. Would you like to?
Sure. I wanted to ask, if you had $100 billion to allocate to fighting aging and solving it, how would you allocate it?
That's a lot of money. I think we can come up with effective replacement strategies for the body and brain for less than that. Maybe half. So that leaves a lot of, in areas that we could also invest in that current longevity researchers are working on. I think, like I mentioned early on, I think genetics does have potential down the road. Even if it does mean creating things from sort of certain genes from scratch and implementation being a problem, but an understanding of how a genome could be changed towards a longer living organism, I think will happen. And and I think it will synergize with replacement. So if you can make, body parts, brain tissue, ex vivo, then you can genetically modify them much more easily. You don't have to be, loading up the brain or anything with viruses to try to deliver your genes, or sort of doing CRISPR on sort of a little bit blindly and not necessarily targeting the right cell type. So all those implementation problems are maybe fixed by replacement. And so we could, not only replace to get rid of damage, but we could potentially also improve, our basic genetic makeup too, so that what we replace with could live longer. But I think that's going to take a lot longer to achieve. But it's worth investing in as well. And a lot of that can be, there's a lot of interest in AI, sort of driving this. How do you come up with proteins or even new proteins that might do things that that we can't do now? And when I say proteins, nanotechnology is another thing that is sort of a catchphrase a lot of people like to talk about, but it remains somewhat vague in terms of what exactly can be accomplished there. But proteins are nanotechnology, so I think you could sort of develop a bio-based nano approach as well, to being able to manipulate tissue or preserve function better, or I'm sure there's other things too that would be worth with that kind of money investing in. If I think of it, I'll try and mention it later.
Also, not that much. Like probably like there's the NIH budget for 1 year.
But you did say 100 billion, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I know it goes fast, but
how much would you think that solving the whole aging problem cost in total?
Yeah, no, I mean, initially, if we can replace everything, then we beat aging, right? When we replace, even currently, an organ with a lab-grown organ, it doesn't have any age-related damage to it. And if you're doing this wholesale in the body, you don't even have to worry about age tissue.
And you're really confident that, like, with 50 billion, brain included, you could replace everything?
I think so. I mean, it's a guesstimate, right? I've put some estimates together for people and interested parties, and it seems scaling over time and bringing this to people, doing trials. I don't know. Maybe I'm way off. I don't know.
You should go convince Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos to give like a fourth of their money to become immortal.
Yeah, I'd love to. Do you have their contact? I've tried to reach out to them actually, but no reply.
I'll just say I strongly believe that the billionaires, most of them just don't care to that degree. I wrote a thread about it on Twitter, but they're just like everybody else. 99.9% of people don't consider this a problem.
So what about Calico or like Altos Labs? Is that Google and Jeff Bezos funded entities that are trying to tag aging and are $1 billion of funding?
Well, Jeff Bezos isn't the majority investor in Altos. He's a reputedly very small minority investor, mostly lending his name. And broadly speaking, if you put in like 1% of your net worth into something, and it's not 1%, it's much less than 1%, that doesn't mean you care about it. I mean, you're just having a portfolio approach, trying a lot of different things. Not to diminish the value, it's great that he's putting stuff in, but to think that somebody like that would then jump to putting in a quarter of their net worth, I just think that's unlikely not going to happen. I wish it were. I've been thinking about this problem for a year.
That's interesting. I think Peter Thiel maybe gives more, but I'd just like to give an opportunity for those who haven't yet. If you have questions, we have like last 5 minutes. So feel free to raise your voice now.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, it seemed like you were pessimistic about the first generation therapies, buying us a lot of time. So you don't think George Church's first generation gene therapies, which he says should buy us another 20 years, or Senolytics, Rapalogs that are like in phase 2 trials now. And also, I'm assuming the clinical trials for plasma replacement therapy, which have been, shown to get like 25 to 40% reduction in like age-related, I guess, biomarkers and also functionality. You don't think those first generation therapies, along with those combination of those therapies, will get us another 20, 30 years to work on the kind of more complex problems you were alluding to earlier?
Essentially, that's correct. I don't think so, unless you're just talking about increasing health and compressing morbidity. So I think that would be difficult to do in this, 20 to 30 years, but it's not going to extend or slow aging per se. None of these approaches address sort of the core problem of aging. They'll make you healthier, maybe, although that's not clear yet. And these aging biomarkers is, again, those are measures more or less of performance. And if you're talking about the epigenome as one of those markers, that's also sort of downstream of, a lot of the metabolism of cells. But this is a topic that, this is very much worth discussing in depth. So, I think we could have like a whole conference on this and get into this over the course of, a week and to cover, what this involves, what the reasons are for why I think this way and why other people are saying that these are, based on the science, going to increase lifespan. At least, and I don't disagree that there might be some increases in average lifespan, but that's a reflection of health. And I haven't heard George Church say 20 years. I thought he was much more conservative than that.
I just saw an interview with him recently, and he said like he's working on basically a gene therapy that hits 3 different genes that hit basically, he said 25%. So I'm sorry about that. He said about 25%. It should expand median lifespan by 25% in most mammals, including humans. That's what he said in his last interview that I heard from him.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think if we start looking at exactly what he's talking about, how it's going to happen, then I think we might be able to come to a greater consensus about the time that will buy us or not.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. Tim, I think you wanted to ask one more?
Well, I was just sort of curious, Jean, like what your path into like aging science was. Like, was there a moment for you that was, that sort of profound move into the space?
For me, it started when I was really young. First, when I found out that we get old and die, I was, depressed for a couple of years as a little guy. And then I started reading about science and, being inspired by science fiction. I thought, well, okay, maybe this is, maybe there's something we can do about this. So it was very young in my life, like before high school. Already in high school, I was reading everything I could on genetics because at the time I thought that would be the answer. We can DNA is the code of life. Like if that's not the answer, what is? But as I progressed with learning about what aging is, I realized that that's going to be very difficult. So, but this happened very early for me.
So good to hear science fiction did aid in that process. So
keep up the good work.
Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yes, great to have you, Jean. And again, we shared in the chat, maybe we can share again the link to your lab. And again, recommend your book, Replacing Aging, which can be found anywhere, everywhere. To you, Madalena, for the final words, if you'd like to.
Thank you, Galia. Thank you, Jean, for joining us. Thank you, Tim, for helping moderating this. At Jellyfish DAO, we are filmmakers and longevity advocates. We, of course, need help with this DAO, so please follow us on social media, and also you can find out more about us at jellyfish.foundation. We are most in need of Discord moderators, social media help, and DAO building skills. So you can write to us as well, as David is helping us here in the chat to post all the links. There is also on our email address, longevity.media.dao@gmail.com. We are starting off with 3 projects, so 2 feature films and a documentary. And we are going to carry on this fight towards to fight against aging. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Very cool,